Today we'll be taking a look at CodeWars.com and how we can use it to improve our programming skills. CodeWars allows us to try thousands of different small coding exercises to improve our coding ability. However, it can be a bit confusing for new programmers who haven't come across coding katas before or what unit tests are. To start with, we first need to choose our programming language. I'm going to pick JavaScript and then solve a little problem for why this function isn't working. So it's missing a return statement. We'll submit that, then we can sign in. On this screen you can either create a new account or you can link it with your existing GitHub account. I'm going to use GitHub and I'll be back once I've signed in. After signing in, you'll be brought to the dashboard. In the menu on the left we can then go to the katas section where we can search for katas that we want to solve. So coding katas are the little coding exercises that we talked about, and the wording is taken from Japanese martial arts. Also taken from Japanese martial arts is how they grade the difficulty of the katas. So 8Q is actually the easiest and 1Q is the hardest. So these range from very easy problems down here all the way to very hard ones, and we can filter by the difficulty. We can also pick our language, so we'll set this to JavaScript, and then we'll change sort by to be popularity rather than newest. After that we can look through the list of katas to find something that we think is interesting. Maybe let's have a go at this sum of positives kata. After we click into a kata, we can read the description. In this case, it wants us to run through an array of numbers and sum up all of the positive ones. To get started with the coding, we go up and click train. Now that we're in the kata, let's have a look at the different panels on the screen. On the left hand side, we've got our instructions. This is the same information that we saw on the previous detail screen. We also have a tab for output, and we'll come back to that in a minute. On the right hand side, we've got two panels where we can write code. We've got a solution panel, which is where we need to write the code to solve the problem. They've already provided us with the function name that we need to use and the parameters that will be put into it. Before we get coding, let's first look at the sample tests panel. This provides us with some unit tests that will show us example input and the expected output for our function. So if we look at this first assertion, when positive sum is called with this array, we expect the output to be 15. That's because if we add up the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, we should get to 15. The next assertion down will show us the output for a different array. So in the case where we've got 1, -2, 3, 4 and 5, that should add up to 13, as we'll be ignoring that -2 number in our sum. Whilst we're coding, at any point we can decide to run these tests to see which ones are passing or not. To do that, we'll click the test button and we'll see that the output appears in the output tab on the left hand side. In this case, our test is failing and we expect that to happen because we've not written any code yet. Let's try and write some code to get our tests passing. So we're going to want to loop through the array and increment a counter when we hit into positive numbers. So we'll say let count equals 0 to begin with. We can then write a for loop to go through our array. We'll get each number from the index in the array. And if the number is positive, we'll add it to our count. At the end, we'll return our count. Let's run our test to see if that passes. So that's passing the sample tests that they've given us. We can then click attempt. This will run our code against a wider range of tests. And because it's passed that wider range of tests, we can now submit this as a valid solution to the problem. So after we've completed the kata ourselves, we can have a look at how other people have solved it as well. This might give us some different ideas on how it might be solved in different ways. So this top one is doing something similar to what we did. Here we see they're using a reduce function, which is a higher order function. This solution is similar to ours as well, but it's using a for each rather than a for loop that we wrote. So overall you can see that there's a few different ways to solve this kata. Once you've completed the kata, you can then click next kata and it will suggest another kata for you to try out next. Or you could go back to the search kata screen and look for a different one. So when you first come to the site, maybe try out the lower queue difficulties first, and then if they're too easy for you, just jump up the queues until you find ones that start challenging you. You can maybe go and try and find a slightly harder one for us to have a go at. So this is asking us to sum up all the numbers that are multiples of 3 and 5 below a certain number. Again, we'll go up to train, take a look at our instructions and then some of our sample tests. So you can probably solve this in a similar way to the previous one. So if I mod 3 equals 0, or I mod 5 equals 0, then we'll add that number to our sum. At the end, we'll return our sum. And we can see if that works. So that's passing the one sample test that they gave us. Let's see if it passes all of the other tests that they've got. So we could submit that as an answer. Again, we can look at other people's solutions to get an idea of how else it might be done. It is worth noting that just because people have got kind of quite a few best practices or clever in here, it doesn't actually mean that the code they've written is that readable. Judge it yourself with a bit of common sense on how easy is it for you to read their answers and understand what is going on. So some of these solutions, even though they're quite highly rated, they're actually much harder to read and understand than a much simpler solution like this. Alright, hopefully you found that video useful. If you did, leave a like or a comment to let me know. I'd much appreciate it. And have a good day.